Yeah, I don't know. Argus definitely seems to be tracking better. It's been going for a
Yeah, it
while
seems
now.
to so far.
Awesome.
What's also funny is that we actually use a almost identical side scan. At Search, we have we use it as the actual towfish. We don't break it apart into its components like for Argus, but it's very similar. I think it's the same frequencies. We use the same software.
Oh yeah.
The difference though is that they just collect the data all at once. They don't target it, and then they go back to the office and process all the data after the fact because they don't do ROV dives like on stuff immediately. They would go back and do a second project to do usually scuba diver operations. So it is weird for me to see a target and like not have to do anything. Like, oh, there's a cool target, and it's just like, okay, let it go by. We got it. We recorded it. I'm like, we don't need to log it. Nope. Okay. So a lot of this stuff can be done in post process as well.
Right.
We're taking the more instant gratification route.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of our followers says that we should never knock on wood when we're on a ship. That's bad luck.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I should learn some more, like the superstitions on board. That'd be important.
Oh, there are plenty.
Yeah, right?
Mike is not a subscriber to
I
many.
don't do any of them. And I'm grudgingly not whistling because I'll probably be keel hauled, but
So apparently you're not supposed to bring women or redheads on board.
no,
So too bad. There's a bunch of women here.
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah, that was way back when it was supposedly
Yeah.
bad luck.
Mhm.
But I think with the amount of stuff that we've seen and found on Nautilus with largely women crew, we can discount that.
Yeah, exactly. I remember
Yeah.
I wanted to board a very old ship in the Galapagos sailing to French Polynesia, and the captain said no because I was a woman, and that was bad luck.
Wow, that's
Sad.
Yeah, no.
That's so
crazy.
sad.
The chief mate who I'm talking to on the bridge right now, Martina, is female, and she's first mate of the ship.
Yeah, and the leader expedition is also a woman.
Yeah, there's a lot of women out on within OET and out on the Nautilus all the time.
Yeah, right here on the cabin we had Wendy, the pilot, also. Me, I'm pretty sure I'm a woman, also.
And we have Rebecca back here.
We have Rebecca and Didi, right?
Dee Dee stepped out, but
Oh.
she'll be back.
She's still on the ship.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we have
Jeez.
a bunch of.
And our science team, of the 6 of us, there's 2 men and 4 women. So,
Yeah.
Our whole Argus team is women.
That's
Yep,
so
that's
great.
true. Yeah.
The Coast Guard Academy has been working really hard to like fit the proportions of the American public for who we enroll, and I think we're at about 40% female Corps
Wow, really?
cadets
Huh.
right now. Yeah.
Wow,
Interesting.
that's great.
So yeah, they're making pretty good strides for that. It's big for I know, especially with the Coast Guard, what they use it for is diversity of experience and diversity of thought. That if you have all the same people with same backgrounds in a room together, they're not going to come up with many solutions to a problem.
That's right.
But when you have people from all over the world, different backgrounds, different experiences, that's when you really get diverse solutions to whatever you come across.
Yeah, agree.
That's a good philosophy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really good. A lot of things are a lot of places are making that turn, and it's like so good because the older kind of philosophy is like the opposite of what Chris is talking about. It is like it's not very good for finding creative solutions to complex problems, or
Yeah.
it's not very effective.
Well, I mean, especially with the military and armed forces, which are, you know, traditionally used to be all male. It's very cool to see that they're making that effort in that way.
Yeah, it's been. I mean, it's been a while in the making.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really been the push that those who serve the country are adequate and appropriate representation of
Yeah.
those they're
Makes
serving.
sense.
Mhm.
But yeah, we have a lot of international cadets too that their countries and the Coast Guard Academy work together, that they'll come over for the 4 years of training, and then take what they've learned back to their countries. So I don't know a number, but there's a good number of different nationalities that we have at the academy right now.
So to respond a question, we have Argus between 10 and 20 meters above the seafloor.
What are some other rules on ships, other superstitions? You can't knock on wood. I didn't know that.
Isn't there something
Uh,
with bananas?
No bananas.
Yeah.
I
Right.
have heard that
Bananas,
one, which I
yeah.
totally approve of because they're gross.
Oh, what?
I love them, but they do turn other food off. Like bananas, well, there's lots of other food that they go off rapidly.
Yeah, I don't know what the origin of that one is. I just know no bananas. I mean, it kind of ties into no yellow.
Oh, really?
Oh, is that a thing?
Why?
Yeah.
I thought it was just a rotting
Well,
thing.
that's one of Nautilus's colors, so that's bad.
Yeah.
Well, it's yeah. I mean,
Yeah, we're like,
Hercules.
that's one
Hercules
that,
too.
Hercules is yellow.
that's kind of
oh my
out there.
god.
But I know, like, you know, like you'll be harder pressed to find like yellow rain gear for ships. You know, it's very common.
That's why the
you're
immersion
like,
suits aren't yellow.
Mhm.
yeah. Well, I mean that's international orange.
No, I know.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's
Huh.
it's
funny.
a less followed thing,
Mhm.
but it's still out there.
Mhm. Also, as the captain mentioned yesterday, whistling.
Yep.
Yeah. And cutting one's hair or nails also.
You're
Bad
not
luck.
allowed to cut your hair?
Can't cut
or-
your
Yeah, you're not
nails?
allowed.
You
no.
have to cut your nails. I mean,
No,
I
they
can't.
said it's like bad luck. Or
See, I mean,
starting a
so-
voyage, starting a voyage
So
on
they're-
Friday or the first Monday in April.
This makes
also.
me hopeful because there's been so many positive changes with diversity at sea. There's lots of women at sea. People are cutting their nails at
Yeah.
sea. So
Yeah.
maybe one day I'll be
Yeah.
allowed to whistle.
And yeah, exactly. And
Probably not.
having a yellow ROV, yeah, we're okay.
Yeah. We're all game changers out here with our yellow ROV pushing the envelope.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's so many.
yeah. So naming a ship after an engaged woman would make the ship jealous. So
Oh,
just in
okay.
case you're thinking about buying a ship, you cannot do that.
Oh, also don't changing the name of a ship
Yeah, without the proper ceremony.
or having a ship without a name.
Yeah.
That being said, I did see, I was out boating sometime. It was a recreational boat that was called Murphy's Law. I did not think that was a better name than no name.
Yeah, that's kind of a sketchy name for a ship, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the basis of it is everything that will happen, like that can happen,
That
will
can
happen.
happen, will
but the way
happen,
it's
yeah.
usually interpreted is everything that can go wrong,
Negative
will
things.
go wrong.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Not the best name for a boat.
But you know what is a good luck thing? Spitting into the ocean prior to setting sail, apparently.
Okay.
Just
Yeah,
in case.
Did not do that.
That,
But we're going to find the clipper anyways,
Yeah.
even if we
That,
didn't spit.
the spitting we use a lot of times for when we're pulling off the dock, just putting some reference point in the water and you can see what the currents are doing around the dock.
That's probably where it started.
Yeah.
Probably.
That's cool.
Because
That's
otherwise you'll start pulling off the dock and the current will slam you back into it or something. It's usually, they tell us when we have our ship handling classes that just look at bubbles or like buoys or something, but everyone finds it a lot more fun to spit in the water.
Of course. Hey Chris, could you, when you have a sec, could you make a line that's like from the end of this line that goes about, puts those two targets we want to look at about 50 meters off of them so that we get them in the good sweet spot for the sonar and then gets to the next line?
Okay, so like from end of the line to 50 meters off.
Yeah, so 50 meters off, what was it, 12 and 13 I think?
Yeah.
Where's 12?
Oh,
there it is.
Over
Yeah, so
here. So
just
50 meters off of those and then
yeah,
by.
and then continuing up.
Yeah, I can just
Yeah.
drop some interim waypoints and I'll pass it off to Miles.
Yeah. But I think 50 meters is a good spot because we'll get it in both channels. And,
Right,
and there's wiggle room in case we're like slightly off.
yeah.
Probably are.
Do you want them both off port side?
Yeah, that's fine. That makes sense for the for heading up to 13.
What is that that we're seeing at to the right?
Like this.
Uh-huh.
I think that's just, it's the same thing as this.
Mm-hmm,
I think it's
mm-hmm.
just more rock outcrops.
Okay.
That's mostly what we've been seeing. And the nice thing is we're getting a lot of ground truth from the video.
Alright. Just watch this guy, Wendy. It's pretty hard. Oh, it's only small.
Yeah, we're about to switch watches. So we have some of the members of the crew that are going to switch with us. So if you hear some chatting, it's because we're trying to catch up with what's happening.
Hand it off so we can go eat.
Mm-hmm. It's been really nice to be with you and everyone that is following us. So remember to keep tuned while we are on the search for the Samoan Clipper.
Yeah, tune back in 8 hours to watch me try to turn again.
Yeah.
See if it goes any better.
Well, we haven't found anything very promising yet. We have been marking some points to come back and scan them later on. Yeah, we still have several hours to complete scanning the whole grid. And no, I haven't heard about the giant jellyfish found on the coast of Cornwall. I am just checking that out. Thank you for sharing that with us. That looks pretty impressive. Yeah. Yeah, so we have Wendy Snyder as the pilot for Argus right now. Argus is more or less 3,000 meters depth. Hi, morning. Good. I'm gonna pass this to Maddie. Yeah, so Maddie's here. She's gonna take my place. I'll see you guys in 8 hours. And have fun.
All right, good morning, everyone. This is Maddie here. We are just starting the 8 to 12 Samoa time shift. We just switched out from the last watch, and I don't know, should we do another round of introductions just because there are a couple, one new person that I see in the back?
Sure, I'll start. I'm Suna Tuzun. I'm in the data logger seat for this dive.
This is Russ Matthews. I'm the president of Airsea Heritage Foundation and the watch leader.
This is Dee Dee Marks. I'm a maritime archaeologist with Search and happy to be on board.
Miles Saunders, lead navigation and mapping for this cruise.
I'm Trevor Shepard. I'm lead ROV for this cruise.
Lissa Delpy, coming from the University of New Hampshire. I'm the ROV engineering intern. I'm piloting Argus currently.
I'm Stephen Matter, video engineer.
Awesome, and I am Madison Dobsovich. I am the SCF. So for those of you that are just joining, we are just off the coast of American Samoa. We are looking for the Samoan Clipper, which was a Sikorsky 42B aircraft that unfortunately crashed in 1938. It was never found, and the circumstances, based on accident reports, we have a good idea of what happened, but there's a little bit of mystery to it. And so what we're doing right now is having Argus mapping the seafloor with a side scan sonar. So we're going through and marking any sort of anomalies along the bottom of the ocean that might look to be human-made objects. It is unique because it's an Argus-only dive, and what we'll do in the next day or so is send Hercules down to check out all of those points and see, in more detail what we're working with. Last shift, there was about 10 points, potential points that we marked. Has that number changed since then?
We are up to target 13, so we had a few more overnight to add to the list, which is a good thing.
And when we're looking at this side scan sonar mapping, what sort of characteristics would indicate a potential aircraft?
So as we are towing Argus along with the side scan sonar, it is imaging the seafloor using sound, using acoustic pings. We are looking for anything man-made. That could be straight lines, right angles, as well as the type of return that comes off as the acoustic signal bounces off of what is on the seafloor. Typically, geologic features are round and sort of amorphous blobs, and the man-made objects will definitely appear different, possibly isolated in an area where there is no geology. And that's what we are looking for, and those are the targets that we are marking.
And then so these sort of brighter yellow spots, those indicate a height difference from maybe from the bottom of the seafloor up. Is that correct?
Potentially. So the way the sonar works is it sends out an acoustic signal, and where there is a raised feature, there is a shadow that is created where there's a lack of sound that penetrates that. So that shadow can help us determine the outline of a feature, but that's a very important aspect to consider when picking a target. To go along with the side scan sonar, we are lucky enough to have a camera on Argus that you see on your screen. And normally we would not be able to have simultaneous side scan data and underwater video. So we are able to see the seafloor to a certain extent, which is pretty unique and exciting, and allows us to see some of the rocks that we have gone over and compare that to the side scan data.
Yeah, when you're looking at the waterfall display, you see that black void in the middle. That's referred to as the nadir, and the sonar is actually, it's a side scan sonar, so it sends the signals out to the sides, as the name implies, and so you're normally left with this gap in the center, but because of Argus's arrangement, having this camera in the middle is, looking down is giving us a chance to fill in that space and know that we're not missing anything, running directly over it and being blind to it. So we got very fortunate. In fact, in the planning for this, we did not expect to have that capability. So it was a real pleasant surprise to get down there and realize that the visibility was good enough that we were going to be able to see the bottom as we move along.
And what depth are we at about here?
We are 3,200, about 3,185
Meters.
meters.
And do we want to talk a little bit about sort of what happens after this side scan sonar segment is complete? Will we go back through with Argus again, or will we be sending Hercules down in more sort of detailed, longer-term dives?
So at this point, the working plan based upon after we review the targets is to pass Argus right over some of those side scan sonar targets while it's in the water, get a preliminary eyeballs on those targets, and allow us to look at those before pulling Argus up. And for ones that we'd like to more closely look at, we will bring Hercules down that has all the bells and whistles and begin our assessment of the targets and overall site.
Yeah, from what I'm told by our crew here, that the process of reintegrating Hercules will take about 8 hours. So we only want to do that once. And fortunately, with the fact that Argus has its own camera and lighting system on board, that gives us the opportunity to confirm whether or not what we're looking at is more rocks or aircraft wreckage. So we'll be able to verify that first before we go through that long process and then really get into the investigation.
And Russ, it's good to hear your voice up here. Do you, for those of folks that are just now joining us or maybe weren't around earlier this morning, do you want to give sort of a quick rundown of what the Samoan Clipper was? I mean, it was sort of this novel aircraft, right? And it was captained by Ed Musick, who was a pioneer in the aviation industry. And it really, the story behind it is pretty incredible.
Well, Maddie, it's good to be heard, and yeah, I'm happy to talk about Samoan Clipper to anyone and everyone. Yeah, it was innovative, an innovative type, the Sikorsky S-42, and I was actually just rereading this section in John Hill's book on Pan Am. How when they were in the planning stages for this, and of course the idea was to create an airplane that could fly long distances and haul multiple passengers in comfort and speed, and that was Pan Am's aim, was to establish a transoceanic travel, which meant of course long distances, and so there wasn't an airplane that existed at the time that could handle the what Pan Am wanted to do with it, what Juan Trippe wanted to do, and so they put out a call to aircraft manufacturers for a specific type of airplane with the range and the hauling capacity that they needed. And supposedly one of the aircraft manufacturers said they don't want an airplane, they want a miracle. But Igor Sikorsky delivered, and they ultimately built 10 of them. And the idea, initially, the S-42s were intended to fly the Atlantic. Pan Am had started their operation in the Caribbean, and it was their laboratory, flying between the islands there and in Latin America, and progressively, making longer and longer hops and refining the techniques that they needed. And the next logical step was the Atlantic, and they couldn't get landing permission from the Brits. So what they ended up doing instead was deciding to tackle the Pacific, which is obviously an even more daunting challenge. There isn't a harder route to consider, especially at this point when their flying is still so new and so young. So yeah, I think that that's about the aircraft now. So Samoan Clipper was specifically a B model. So it was the 8th of the type built, but the first of the B modification. And really what that meant is that they increased the wingspan by about 4 feet, and and modified the interior with extra fuel tanks to increase its range. The Samoan Clipper was intended to do long-range survey flights, and it primarily was assigned to the run, pioneering the run down to Auckland, New Zealand. And to do that, though, they entrusted that mission with Ed Musick, who was Pan Am's chief pilot, and he was known as pilot number one. He'd been with the airline from the very beginning, from the end of 1927, and had been the man who pioneered all of those routes and all of those techniques and trained all their crews, and so he was, just by nature of the things they were doing, he was setting record after record for distance, for speed, for firsts between points, and was the commanding officer of the first flight that traversed the entirety of the Pacific as a commercial flight, and which was the China Clipper that flew all the way to Manila from California in stages, but and that was really celebrated feat. And in fact, he was on the cover of Time magazine. He was awarded that year the Harmon Trophy, which recognized the outstanding aviator in the world, and so it was quite a shock, for him to be lost in this way. So.
Absolutely, and we did have a question come in. What sort of engine did the Samoan Clipper have?
Samoan Clipper had 4 Pratt & Whitney R1690 Hornet radials, each of them weighing about a half ton apiece, and I believe 750 horsepower per engine. So yeah, quite a powerful power plant for its day, and possibly targets for us to spot as we move along. They're one of the more solid pieces, and don't know if they'll still be attached to the wing or not. But it's something to look out for. And each had 3-bladed Hamilton standard propellers with an 11-foot propeller arc, which could also be a good target for us.
And that's a great question as well. What sort of targets are we anticipating? I mean, is there any sort of assumption that the plane may be intact? Are there parts of the plane that may be stronger and could have withstood, impact or whatever circumstances happened during that accident?
Well, yeah, we're in a bit of an area of speculation, but that's part of what we're here to do. We have some clues from the accident report, just based on the types of material they found at the site, and also an eyewitness account. And the eyewitness they actually judged to be very reliable, because she told her story to the head or the chief of her village before the plane was reported to be missing. And so according to her, she was in a boat just off the mouth of Fangasa Bay, which is on the northern side of Tutuila Island, the main island of American Samoa, and just the other side of Pongo Pongo. And she said she saw the airplane fly low overhead, headed in the direction of Apia, which is basically west, and then it made a wide turn out and turned out to sea, and then dove for the water, and it was just at the point of what she assumed was its landing, when there was a flash and a detonation and smoke, and she saw. According to her, she saw the wings of the plane floating at the surface for approximately 5 minutes before they disappeared. So the accident investigators at the time, interpreted that as, the airplane was known. The last radio transmission said that they were intending to dump fuel. They had developed an oil leak in one of the engines about an hour and 19 minutes after leaving Pongo Pongo on their way to Auckland, and elected to turn around and come back rather than continue on an 1,800-mile flight on 3 engines instead of 4. So they last radio transmission said that they were dumping fuel in order to lighten the aircraft to land in that very restricted inner harbor at Pongo Pongo. And something happened during that process, that something ignited the fuel or the fuel vapors and started a fire that led to an explosion. And the interpretation of the investigators at the time was that Music very likely knew there was a fire, knew there was a problem, and was taking action to try and set the plane down and save the crew, and really had almost completed that when they were overwhelmed. So in terms of our investigation, I mean, it means that the plane, the explosion occurred, just above the surface of the water at fairly low speed, and again, given the nature of the items that were found, they were bits of partitioning and flooring, some of the texts from the navigational books, a jacket, and with the Pan American wings still attached that they determined belonged to the radio officer, Tom Findlay. So definitively things from Samoan Clipper, but also, and heartbreakingly so, but also confined to kind of these two compartments, Compartment D and the navigator's compartment. So that indicates a fire and an explosion in the hull tanks inside the fuselage, and according to the eyewitness, the wing was intact, and that makes sense because the wing is really the strongest part of the airplane. It was a double spar stress skin construction, and really robust and immensely strong, as it was described in the literature of the time. So, and also the largest single piece on the airplane, 118 feet wingspan, and 13 feet across. So that's if it's still intact, which it appeared to be, at the time, that is probably our most promising potential target. Nice long straight edges, and with the engines, which would be very bright targets in themselves. And then we started to really get into some real speculation, but my thought is that if it's really, we had a detonation in the center section of the airplane, that the extreme ends may have also come through reasonably intact. So so the tail, especially the tail, would have been the furthest removed from the detonation, and there were doors between the compartments, and that may have prevented the force of the explosion and the fire to propagate back. And the tail would be a very large piece in itself. The plane was 21 feet from the bottom of the keel to the tip of the rudders, and the horizontal tail was 38 feet across, and that would be not only a large object, but with lots of things sticking out at different directions, so that it would land, and no matter what orientation it was, there would be pieces that are giving a lot of relief off the bottom of the seabed that would again assist us in spotting it. And then there's the potential that the cockpit and the bow section could be intact as well. So yeah, I think that that was the long version of the answer to your question.
Yeah, no, that was great. And you know, this was 1938. What sort of material was the plane made of? You know, what was sort of common at the time, and you know, just thinking of the great depth that we're currently scanning and we're operating at. You know, are there natural forces, waves, or storm action that may have impacted the aircraft, or you know, is it at such a depth that we can sort of assume it's been relatively untouched for the last 81 years?
Yeah, the airplane was all aluminum construction, and with the aluminum frames, and then aluminum skin riveted to that, and then the control surfaces were aluminum structure with frame structure with doped fabric covering, which made them lighter weight. And because at that time all of the control inputs were muscle powered, so you just have cables running back and forth from the flight controls to the to the ailerons, to the rudders, to the elevators, and so that made them lighter weight. And then, sorry, what was the rest of your question? Oh, the natural forces. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah, this is we're in roughly 3,000 meters. There's no sunlight that penetrates down this far, so we're not anticipating there'd be any kind of coral growth or much in the way of like marine organisms that would have had any kind of adverse effect on the historic structure. This is probably still become a marine habitat. As the sea incorporates this into this area, and that the local inhabitants, whatever they may be, could use it for shelter. And but yeah, and it's so deep that that we don't expect that there's any like passing storms or wave action won't have affected it. We don't. The currents in this area are not well known. So potentially there could be some sort of scouring effect if there were a lot of current running through here, and with lots of bits of sand and things suspended in the water column, and kind of scouring over the aluminum, which it does not tend to like. If you expose it, once it's stable, it's actually pretty. It survives pretty well, but if you continually expose the underlayers, then the corrosion can really set in. We've seen examples of aircraft that have been found in similar circumstances just in the last few years. The Turkish Navy discovered an Air France Constellation that went down in 1953. That I think was only in about 800 meters of water, but you could still read the Air France logo on the side of the airplane. And then in March of last year, 2018, the crew on RV Petrel discovered the wreck of a U.S. aircraft carrier, the Lexington, that was sunk at the Battle of the Coral Sea, and that was in a virtually the same depth, and only 4 years, separated. It was sunk in May of 1942, so only 4 years after the loss of Simone Clipper. And what's interesting, at least in this relating to this case, is that there were several aircraft from Air Group 2 that were still on deck when the Lexington went down, and they floated free and were deposited all throughout the debris field, and so there was an F4F-3 Wildcat fighter and 7 Douglas TBD Devastators, TBD-1 Devastators, that were in astonishing condition, where the aluminum was solid, and the paintwork was still bright. You can read the fuselage codes and the squadron markings and see the national insignia, and even the doped fabric, like the organic doped fabric covering on the rudders and tail surfaces were still were still there, which was very rare to see that, to see organic material that had survived that well. So, it might be a bit of wishful thinking, but doesn't seem totally unreasonable to think that perhaps the same circumstances prevail here that might have allowed the remains of Samoan Clipper to be preserved. One of the other things that they noticed with the Lexington aircraft was that the ones that were closer to the fire, where the aluminum structure had been somewhat compromised before it went into the water, there was a greater amount of deterioration on those. So potentially, some of the fire affected areas on Samoan Clipper may have deteriorated more than the other sections. But it's like I said, it's still speculation, and there's really only one way to know for sure, and that's to go and look and try and find it.
Right, and this was a 7-man crew, no passengers, and it was a mail carrier, right?
Yes, that's correct. The Pan Am, in their business plan, they were the America's international airline, and Juan Trippe, the founder, had recognized that was a way, a very lucrative way to make aviation work as a business, and that the government would pay subsidies for mail to be carried to speed to commerce, assist commerce and increase trade, and you saw the same thing with steamships. RMS Titanic that stands for Royal Mail Ship. So yes, government subsidies again were another way to increase your revenues and make a success of a business. So claiming those contracts was vital to Pan Am's growth as a company, and so the mission for Samoan Clipper was to establish airmail to New Zealand, and they had done the survey work in March and April of 1937. They'd made the first run down to Auckland to demonstrate that it was viable, and then by the end of the year they needed to begin regular mail deliveries. And so in December of that year, as time is running short, they brought Samoan Clipper back. Samoan Clipper had actually made that run under a different name. It was known originally as Pan American Clipper 2, and then after that initial run to New Zealand, it was assigned to the other side of the Pacific, and it was flown to Manila, and then ran a shuttle from there to Macau and to Hong Kong under the name Hong Kong Clipper. But they brought it back in December for this run, and they made at the end of the month they made a run down to Auckland and picked up the mail and brought it back to the United States, and then just after a few days rest, turned around and they were on their way back. So this one was actually within the company. This was coded as Run A5, which I have always assumed A stands for Auckland. But so they were on their way down once again to make their way to Auckland, and this time hauling the mail back. So that was to establish the round trip service. And so of course they were not carrying passengers. And the Sikorsky S-42 was not, since it was intended initially for the Atlantic, it didn't normally have the legs, the range to do these long Pacific runs. I mean, the initial flight out from California to Honolulu is 2,400 miles, and one of the longest overwater, uninterrupted overwater routes on Earth. So in order to make those hops, the S-42 had to be modified with these extra fuel tanks, and you couldn't haul passengers, with that, and certainly couldn't carry enough, not enough, not enough to make it viable, and not enough, and not in perfect safety as well, because the having fuel inside the aircraft was a bit of a risk, as we unfortunately was demonstrated. But there were other airplanes on the drawing board that were going to come along that were larger and could carry more passengers over a greater distance and more cargo. And those were being designed by Boeing, known as the 314, the 314, or sometimes referred to as the Super Clippers. So yeah, on that day there were 7 men total on board that were lost with Samoan Clipper.
Right, and so it's it's important to remember that this is the final resting place for 7 men and 7 sort of pioneers in this industry, right? And so, sort of speaking to that, the impact of this, the potential for this discovery is pretty huge. I mean, it reaches many corners of the world.
Yeah, we want to be mindful of that, and yes, I mean, Ed Musick is a real unsung hero in the development of aviation, and I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know that much about him until I started researching this, and I love this stuff, and I didn't know half of what he had done. The first air show held in the United States was in 1910 at Dominguez Field in Los Angeles, California, and in the audience of that show was a teenage Ed Musick at 16, and was just captured by the possibility of flight. And he then would take every opportunity to see aircraft and see flying demonstrations, and dreamed of the time when he could do that too. And his friends, after a couple of years, got tired of waiting, and aviation, especially back then, was a very expensive proposition. So they decided the best way, the only way that they were going to get to fly, is if they built their own plane, which is what they did. And then immediately wrecked it, and built another one and wrecked that. But eventually, learned to fly. And so by 1913, 1914,